Prospect House Media.
And now, prepare yourself for the only weekly podcast you won't want to miss. Welcome to the Ameritocracy Show with Troy Edgar, live from our studios in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C.
Hey everybody, I am Troy Edgar and welcome to the Ameritocracy Show. Thank you for tuning in and checking it out. It is greatly appreciated. This podcast examines the conditions for personal and economic growth and opportunity across America. This week, global IT leader and Reverend Barry Richards sits down in my LA studio to talk about the effort required to achieve your goals, the meaning of life, and why he feels that education is the great equalizer. Barry has an incredible and inspirational story. He is both the pastor at the Pentecostal City Mission Church in South Central Los Angeles and a corporate IT leader at one of the largest utilities in the nation. He was born and raised in Jamaica and came to the U.S. in 1983, where he earned his bachelor's degree in computer engineering from Cal State Dominguez Hills, an MBA focused on finance from University of California, Riverside, and his master's of divinity from the Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena. Barry and I met in May of 2000 at one of my consulting clients when I was with PricewaterhouseCoopers. We always make time to stay in touch and break bread. Many times our discussions are very substantive and purpose-driven. Today was one of those discussions. I hope you enjoy it. All right, Barry, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
It is my honor, Troy, to join you on this first podcast.
Absolutely. It's being the first. I can't think of anybody better than to be the first guest. Thank you, Barry. You and I have talked about this. My objective this podcast is to focus on performance and look at the importance of mentors, credentials, and policy that really sets up an organization and individuals for success. In the beginning of the podcast, I put a summary of your background, and I talk a little bit about that in the opening of the show. But for our listeners, would you mind telling them about your journey and letting them get to know you a little bit better of the path to America in 1983 when you came over from Jamaica to your current two roles that you have as an IT leader and a pastor?
Sure. My journey began in Jamaica. I was born there and came to the United States in 1983. My family actually originates in Jamaica, but all my mom's folks moved to England back in the 50s before I was born, and my dad's folks moved to New Jersey. Somehow we ended up here in California, and through the relationship with our church. So I came here, and I had taken the SAT back in Jamaica, and because my sister lived there, thought perhaps, well, she lives in Los Angeles, I need to find a school in Los Angeles. And so I picked Los Angeles Southwest College, didn't know the difference, and UCLA. My scores on the SAT were high enough, and so I was, got an invitation to be admitted to UCLA. But my sister, not knowing the difference, decided that, well, it's too far from where she lives. So she decided to take me to Cal State Long Beach. And on the way there, she saw Cal State Dominguez Hills and just made a right turn and came out the freeway and enrolled me at Cal State Dominguez Hills.
Oh, wow.
There I majored in computer science and in physics, graduated, started working in the IT industry. And then subsequently went on to get an MBA at UC Riverside. And from there, went on to seminary to get a master's in divinity. So in a nutshell, the earned degrees that I've gotten enabled me to establish a platform in a vocation or a profession, which was computer programming or software engineering. Subsequently, I recognized that I didn't speak the language of my business clients, which led me to the MBA. And from there, I began to seek more personal fulfillment and thus the path to seminary.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Barry. And you and I have a long history together. We'll get into it a little bit more on, some of the details of our 20 plus years together. But can you please talk about how you and I met and some of the key elements that really forged our relationship over these years.
Well, we met Troy working for a company who shall remain nameless that grew through mergers and acquisition. And obviously, when companies grow through that mechanism, they have a need to consolidate multiple systems that do duplicate things on a common platform. So it just so happens that this particular company had grown through mergers and acquisitions and had established multiple operations overseas in Europe. And one day I was in what was called the den at this particular company working, and the CFO came looking for someone to go to Cork, Ireland, to work on a PPV problem. I had no idea what it was, but I raised my hand, and I then had to be interviewed by you and also to be informed of what exactly I was getting myself into. In that conversation, I think you took such care to acquaint me with Cork and mergers and acquisition and where I was going and what it would take, that I recognized that there was something more to you than just a Price Waterhouse consultant, which is what you were back then.
That's right.
Right.
Yep. And hey, Barry, PPV, just for the listeners.
Purchase price variance.
Yeah, we won't get into the detail of that, but I think in case anybody was wondering.
Right. The issue there had to do with multi-currency conversions between all the different companies that this particular company had acquired, and getting the purchase price variance calculated correctly with all the multi-currency issues. And because it wasn't being done correctly, they needed someone to go and look at the actual module in PeopleSoft that was doing this. And for whatever reason, I raised my hands, went. You became my Sherpa, if you may, in Cork, guided me along the way. And from then on, this brotherhood was formed. That to this day is as strong as a David and a Jonathan brotherhood from Scripture.
Wow. Yeah, thank you. That company was way back in the day, and that was I was there with PricewaterhouseCoopers, and it was a huge global project.
Correct.
Setting up a shared service center in Ireland and in Las Vegas.
In Las Vegas, and we had participation from the UK and Spain and Germany, and it was truly an international project. But at that time, Troy, I had no experience necessarily with that scale, but you had seen it before. So to a large extent, you helped me to get my footing under what exactly that meant. And then we were sort of, the first time I went to Cork in this experience that I'm talking about, I was there for 21 days, and it rained the first 17 days, which was something, if you're coming from Los Angeles, it's not normal. But then we found a way to bond.
Yeah.
In those days. And what was even more important was that the stresses that we had led us to work on the weekends, on Sundays, late nights, but it was obvious we were solving problems.
Right.
And because we were both problem solvers of different sorts, there was that connection. You were always the business-oriented guy with the big picture, and I was the guy who could write the code, but they came together in a meaningful way.
Yeah, that was a 120-day trip there, but it was a time that lasted over a year, going back and forth away from our families. And
that's correct.
And it was interesting because for that company, we had set up the shared service center in Cork, Ireland. I was involved with hiring the person that they had take over that shared service center, and so it kind of felt like a plank holder at the very beginning. And then so as you kind of came over, it did feel like home. The Irish people, unbelievable. Yeah. And, I do remember us, the Kingsley and the
Kingsley Hotel.
Kingsley Hotel.
Yeah. Yeah. The Kingsley Hotel was a remarkable place to stay because it rained so much, but you couldn't have a conversation in your room because the river behind us roared when it rained.
That's right.
And you had to close the window just to have a conversation. But it was such a refreshing experience. And then I remembered back then you would go running in the morning. I won't tell anyone of that crazy experience, but you would go running in the morning in the rain, and it just made no sense to me.
Yeah, no, it Yeah, I still do that, and it definitely is a good way to kind of orient yourself too with a city if you're
Absolutely.
not familiar. But hey, Barry, as we were kind of going through, a couple key things happened. Cork. We both kind of were in Cork at that time, and then we were also kind of going after the first year. You set up in Las Vegas.
Correct.
We started also rolling out the rest of that shared services model in Las Vegas. So for me, I was going between Cork and Las Vegas a lot and not home a lot. And one day, flying over to Cork with the chief financial officer of this corporation, we get off from London into Cork, and we land, and we get there, and everybody's watching the TV screens.
Yeah.
And
9/11.
Yeah, the 9/11.
Yeah.
And so they were like, hey, and we were wondering why everybody was watching their computer screens. And about 2 hours into that, we started seeing it was really bad. And they had the other tower hit. The CFO that I was with, and I'll tell my side of this, and I really want you to tell because this really kind of brought us together too. As the CFO looked at me, we were supposed to be there for 3 weeks on a tour between leaving, after we got into Ireland, we were going to Germany, to France, about 15 different countries to their operations to evangelize about what we were getting ready to do as consolidating into that center. He looked at me and he said, I'm going right back home. And I'm like, well, why is that? And he goes, they're going to shut down the airspace. We're going to get stuck over here. So he booked it like everybody, the CFO of a Fortune 500 company comes into a building, it's a big deal.
That's
he
right.
walked right out and no one even paid attention. And sure enough, airspace was shut down. But I want to, and I was there for a couple of weeks. Well, tell me on your side what you were going through, because you were in Las Vegas.
We were, as you know, as you've mentioned correctly, before we get to Las Vegas, when we solved, Troy, the PPV problem in Cork, you may recall that the CFO called and then said to me that, I'm going to make you the technical lead for the North American implementation. And I had no idea what that meant. And at that particular point in time, that success led to vulnerability, because now he wanted to promote me, but I was comfortable writing code, and he wanted to now lift me up as a people leader. And I didn't really have, I don't believe, the skills to be a people leader. But what he said to me is that, one, I'll be there to catch you. Right. Troy knows how to lead people. He is going to be the third leg of the stool, because he paired me with a lady in Boston, you may recall. But it was Debbie, Barry, and Troy that now was responsible for leading. So she was business, I was IT, and you were the people leader. And if you recall, it was that triumvirate, if you may, that enabled us to do the great things that we did. So I don't want to forget that particular aspect of the story, because though you were not an employee of the company, as a consultant, you played a significant part in enabling success, right? And in showing what it means to be a leader of people, which is perhaps one of the most difficult things to do, because you can write algorithms. You can put those on paper, they begin and they end, and you have repeat clauses that execute. But to lead people was something that was an intangible that you brought to the table. The other party was a business leader. But I thought the three of us did some amazing things.
It was awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you ended up having to find a rental car to get home.
That's right.
From there,
I'll tell you about the
airspace-
story.
Yeah.
Yes. Pardon me for forgetting about it. So I flew from Ontario International, always on Mondays or Tuesdays, to Las Vegas. And on that particular day, I was in the plane waiting to take off. And the pilot came on and said, we're not going anywhere today. An accident just occurred in New York. And we don't really know what it is. So airports are made for things to flow in a particular direction. So we sat in the plane waiting for our opportunity to get out. And then he says, well, we are not going anywhere today. Another plane really crashed in. And at that point in time, we realized something terrible had happened. And so got off, got a cab, went back home.
So I think everybody, especially in our generation of working right now, they remember that day, and it kind of brings you together, and you always remember the people that you're with. So, and then probably the one other part I think of that time period many years back was I remember I was leaving PricewaterhouseCoopers to start a company.
That's right.
And you and I had been having a lot of deep discussions on different things.
That's right.
Everything from religion, family, balance, trying to figure out what's coming. Um,
I
that's when you
remember that
first
well.
started being a little bit of my mentor.
Yeah. Back then, Troy, you had a vision for starting a company, and I thought, well, wouldn't it just have been easier to get a job here where we're working? They already know you, and you have great reputation with everybody. And you said, no. I remember distinctly, we're walking through McCarran International Airport, right, in Las Vegas. And you said to me, Barry, we make pretty good money, decent money in our daytime jobs. But my goal is to get to a place in life where I'm making money in my sleep. I had never heard that concept before, and I thought about it. Wow, making money in your sleep. That then became, I thought, the vision of something bigger. And for quite some time, we would talk about, well, what does that look like? And then you would walk me through all the Indian firms with whom you could partner to deliver solutions 24 hours a day when you're sleeping. And it made no sense to me because I didn't think in those terms. But what became very apparent was how driven you were. And then the idea of, what am I going to call this company? Mm-hmm. And I distinctly recall you standing up and say, it's going to be called Global Conductor. That company that conducts business globally, bringing different solutions together in order to make things work. And I thought, wow, that is amazing. I have never actually forgotten the importance of that casual conversation around making money in my sleep. I just haven't been able to do it as well as you have, but it's a fascinating conversation.
Yeah, no, that global conductor, definitely that conductor mindset.
And you started that from the ground up.
Yeah.
Because when we were talking about that, Troy, you had no staff.
Yeah.
All you had was a vision and a piece of paper and the idea that I'm going to conduct business globally. Mm-hmm. Fascinating.
Yeah. No, thank you.
And I thought it was, just a lesson in strategic thinking for the long term.
Yeah. Well, you've definitely got to have your family and a lot of people behind you that are depending on you to make sure that that's successful. So a lot of people always say, God, Troy, you've done a lot and been successful. And it's like, yeah, but my family has been really important.
Yeah.
And, it's a lot of hours too and dedication. But let me ask you this. You and I talk about meritocracy and we talk about different things that, really kind of build, sometimes when I'm having discussions with people, they have like a math equation that says, meritocracy is basically, intelligence plus effort. And then some people say it's intelligence plus effort plus luck. Mm-hmm. But you have always said that you felt that education was the great equalizer in merit. And can you talk about that?
Sure. So my father was not, he was illiterate. He had his own business. He had a small retail operation, but he never had the ability to tap into education in the way that moved a person from one layer to the next. But he always knew, because it was a core concept in our home, that with education, all things are possible. So I grew up learning that education is the great equalizer, meaning if you are given the opportunity to learn and you make use of it, it opens doors. And when you walk through the door that it opens other doors. And as long as you continue to learn, doors continue to open, right? So if you take, but it doesn't come easily, right? You've got to pursue education, which then opens doors. And then you've got to be willing to go through the door when it opens and see what's on the other side. The idea being you can't necessarily remain in the state where you are, but that as long as you continue to learn, you have something then to share. You have something that becomes, in our culture, marketable. And you can then trade that for a price, which obviously then lifts you up from where you are. Mm-hmm. It isn't a perfect equation, but if it works for the vast majority of the people, then it is a de facto truth that it is a great equalizer. It is rare that you see someone who pursues education, no matter what their lot in life, no matter where they started, and they're not able to move themselves from where they are. So if you take me, for example, I worked my way through my computer science and physics major, my computer science major and physics minor. I worked my way through UCR with an emphasis in finance and an MBA. I worked my way through seminary. And all of those academic achievements have enabled me to do things differently, go new places, speak more comprehensively about the things that I know, even though I just know a sliver of those things. But that's the value of education. It opens you up to a world of knowing and learning and sharing.
Well, I got to tell you, Barry, if you kind of keep going down that path, because something that I thought was very interesting is your path and purpose of becoming a reverend.
Yeah.
Talk about that, because it's almost like you got ahead of the path and then you're like, I need to kind of reinforce my credentials.
Well, I attend, Troy, a Pentecostal church. And if you know anything about Pentecostalism or that particular denomination, they're not as formal as the high church, right? So over the years, I've learned just how to speak powerfully on a variety of different topics to different people. And one Sunday after service or during service, the bishop at the church simply laid hands on me. That's the expression they use in church. And she consecrated me as a reverend. It wasn't part of my plan. I had no intention of going down that path whatsoever. But when she did that, now the burden became mine to not rest on what comes naturally, but then to augment what comes naturally with structured learning. And so the very next day, believe it or not, I began searching for a seminary to attend. And I stumbled upon the great seminary in Pasadena, Fuller Theological Seminary.
That's great.
Spent 5 years there while working, taking care of my family, and earned a master's in divinity. I must tell you, it was my most important transformation, because it taught me not just about who I am, but about things that all humans are concerned with. Who is that higher power? And how does that fit in the overall nucleus of meaning that gives me life?
I think for me, you've always had kind of a grounding feel and purpose. It doesn't surprise me that the bishop went to you. In the show notes, we're going to have a link to your church so people can get an idea. And there's a lot more to that story. We'll probably end up talking about too, because that church has a foundation in Jamaica.
It does.
And so, you saying, hey, I was just at church and somebody laid hands on you, is simplifying a really complex story of really a life that your family has had a significant amount of involvement with that church, probably here, probably in Jamaica, and then went on. And I know for a fact, because you and I have discussions, I'm not sure if it was before you were actually, ordained, but they would have you go speak all over the world. I remember talking to you a couple times, and you're in England, you're all over the world too. So.
Yeah, the church does have its roots in Jamaica, you're correct, but it has branches in Belize, Florida, New York, Toronto, Canada, the UK, and there are 2 branches here in California as well. So, and as a matter of fact, we're in the process of opening a new branch in Kisii, Kenya at the moment. So thanks for mentioning that. Yeah,
no, not a problem. And, when you go to become a reverend, and you are really, like, I think you've said it just now, you're looking for purpose and meaning. And I remember talking to you, and your comment to me was, hey, Troy, my view of something like that was, I always thought, man, it'd be great to go to law school, because being a guy that grew up in a blue collar family that didn't have really, mentors that took me down an education path, I always used to hear, like, hey, you go to law school, it teaches you a different way of thinking and looking at problems. And seminary, I think for yourself, like you're saying, it one of the things that it seems like is the meaning of life, like what, and so before you can get to priorities, it's like trying to find the meaning. Yeah. What is your view of that?
So years ago, I read a book by Viktor Frankl, I believe, on man's search for meaning. I don't remember all of what it says, but what is important is that each of us has to, in the grand scheme of things, put together a hierarchy of meaning. what's most important to you, and how, because there are different things that are important to us, and what's most important to you is where you put your emphasis, is where you put your drive, is where you place your values. And for me, I needed to find that source of truth, that source of meaning, and for me, that's God. And my family, my wife and my girls and my extended family, and the faith that I belong to teaches that it is also very important that you can give something back to a community, to a person. But we are made bigger when we're able to give, and the idea that you can give something back to a community or someone is a fundamental part of finding meaning. You know, being able to extend a hand and do something for someone that lifts them is core to who I am, and core to my belief system, and core to the hierarchy of meaning within which I place myself.
That book by Viktor Frankl, I've read that recently too. It's kind of interesting. We have an intersection there, but it, for people that haven't read that book, it focuses on a psychologist that
Yes.
Basically got put into a concentration camp.
A Jew, yes.
Yeah, a Jewish man that was put into a concentration camp, and so it's not like I'm going to be self-deprecating. It's not like somebody like me that's not fully paying attention to what's going on. Like this guy knows the 4 stages of grief. He knows.
That's right.
So he's assessing this as he's going through it, and the book really talks about when you strip things down to its most basic, where people have to have a reason to get up in the morning. It's freezing outside and you have wet shoes to put on and you're about ready to go do 10 hours of work in a trench. And then they're going to, it was just definitely a significantly bad situation. And he looked around and he really tried to kind of motivate himself. And he looked at other people to see how they motivated themselves.
And some didn't.
And they didn't. Yeah.
And he was able to extricate himself from what was almost hopelessness, right? And because he found meaning in life that transcended his physical circumstances.
And I think that's, when you're talking about, that meaning, I think you really do got to find the core.
Yeah. It's a big topic, the idea of finding the center of what motivates you, what moves you. Because the fact of the matter is, Troy, you can go through life without even giving these things a thought. And what happens sometimes is that you're just set adrift. But when you find that, what gives you meaning, it anchors you to something that is unshakable at times. And if that is your faith, that's wonderful. If that is your family, then it moves you in a certain direction. But it's important, I believe, to have that, or to identify what that is for each of us. After establishing with the listeners, your path, your journey, professional and as a pastor, a lot of the discussions that you and I have, I always talk about developing your mentor network, and to kind of use the phrase of, I look at that as a little bit like a blackout bingo card, where you've got to get kind of a really good mosaic of support. Yes.
Some of us focus on just trying to get professional support. Some of us get psychological help. I've always looked at you as somebody to help me from a spiritual perspective, and spiritual, not scary spiritual,
Sure.
but like
how do you put a framework of thought around this particular issue?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because I think for me, and to just put it out there, I mean, you, on top of being a really good friend or one of my best friends, you've also married Betty and I. But I think that, the times outside of the professional world where we're trying to get our priorities together, deaths in the family, I call you and I talk to you. I'm getting ready to do a eulogy, and I want to make sure, I'm not trying to be someone that is, more holy than anybody. So it's really from a layman perspective, but I know that there's a significant responsibility. So, And I remember, Barry, one of the things, like I said, it was marriage, family, kids, our kids, trying to balance things, make trade-offs, being away from home. I remember when I was running for state assembly in 2012, I was running in a district that had Little Saigon,
Yeah.
and when I look at my hierarchy of importance of what's important, I also am a believer. So it's God, it's my wife, it's my family, and my job, and then my friends.
Yeah.
And so I kind of keep it in order of what's most important. And it's not necessarily representative where I spend my time, because a lot of
Right.
times I'm on the road, but that is my true north, like
Of
you
course.
say.
Of course.
And but what I remember in that assembly run, it had a pretty significant. It's in Little Saigon and Westminster area, and they have a pretty big Buddhist cultural environment that, and so to get to know the people I was running for in office, you need to go to where the people are at.
Of course.
And so, I had consultants that would help me, and they're like, Troy, we need to go to the Buddhist temple. We need to do all these different things. And I remember walking into the Buddhist temple. I'd never been in one before, and people were super nice. I actually sat for like a 2-hour time period through service, just to try and get a perspective. They would talk to me, and and I'm a genuine guy, and I'm a straight shooter too. So if I say I really appreciate you helping me or being here or giving me an idea and a better perspective, I really meant it from my heart.
Of course.
But the first thing I did is I got in the car and I was driving away, and I'm calling you, and
Yep.
I'm like, Barry, I've never been in a Buddhist temple. Is that sacrilegious? I don't know if I crossed a boundary.
Yeah.
And, for me, again, meritocracy is about merit and performance and professional. But I think on the spiritual things too, just to try and reconcile, and it doesn't matter. It's all higher power.
That's right.
And at some point you're in some different place. And I remember you helping me with that. So do you remember that call?
I don't remember all the details of it, but I think it would have been something around the lines of, everyone has their understanding of God. And it is important to be able to dialogue with people from an interfaith standpoint. Because at the end of the day, you're not trying to drive a wedge between yourself and anybody else, but you're trying to find common ground and common meaning. We're all human beings. We have different belief systems. And we sometimes have more in common than we believe. And unless you're on a path of proselytizing, which you weren't, it makes perfect sense to go out and meet with members of your constituents. After all, you're not performing a religious service, right? You are, in fact, performing what is a public policy-oriented engagement. And you can't be a public policy servant for just people who are of your faith. You've got to be for everybody. And I know you would have been just a great congressman, Troy, for that area.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Barry. I call you a spiritual mentor. When you look at that, and maybe it's a no-brainer because you're also a pastor, but do you look at yourself as a spiritual mentor? And, it's not something you put a sign up on your door and say, hey, we're available.
I to be honest with you, I provide counsel to lots of different folks, but I never put a label on it. From my vantage point, it is just something that I do. When I hear the term mentor, I know what it means, but it sounds in my mind bigger than who I am. But I do speak and encourage and lift up, just by virtue of being in ministry, people who are sometimes hopeless, people who need to know that there is light and there is a better tomorrow sometimes. And so to be able to speak to them from that vantage point is something that I take great honor, not pride, in doing. And carry that mantle with some understanding of the responsibility that comes with it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Last question, Barry.
Sure.
Who's your mentor?
So that's an interesting question, Troy. I'm gonna answer you with a metaphorical answer. When I started my career, I worked for Transamerica, and I was admitted to what was called a PATC class, a Programmer Analyst Training class, that began in January of a particular year, ended in April. But it was difficult. And Transamerica took you through very rigorous lessons or teachings for 8, 9, 10 hours a day, every day for 4 months. In middle February of the year that I was a PATC, the librarian of that program, her name was Marilyn Baldwin. She saw me walking through the Transamerica building with stacks of paper, and I looked like I was lost. And Marilyn came up to me and she stopped me and she waved a finger at me and she said, "You make sure after you've been here for 10 years, you have 10 years experience, not 1 year, 10 times." I was 6 weeks into that program and I had 10 weeks left. And I looked at her and I thought to myself, lady, you're absolutely out of your mind. I don't know if I'm going to make it through the next 10 weeks. And here you are telling me about when I've been here for 10 years.
Right.
Make sure that I have 10 years experience and not 1 year, 10 times. Troy, I got through that program. Wasn't able to focus on what she said then, but when I looked back retrospectively at what she was encouraging me to do, what she actually did was she gave me my North Star. And so today and throughout all my life, I gauge myself with whether or not I am making real progress or am I just doing the same thing over and over and over. I have never actually received any other professional counsel, if you may, around what it is I should do and how I should govern myself. But having that fixed position that enables me to measure. Barry, have you done this for 3 years and you have 3 years experience or 1 year 3 times? And whatever that time frame is really for each of us as individuals to assess. It's not a mentor per se, but that is my North Star with my family, with my career, in church, with my friends, always seeking to make sure that I'm growing, which is really what it boils down to. A personal assessment as to whether or not there is growth in your life. And I think that's important for all of us.
Yeah, no, Barry, that's awesome. I just wanted to thank you so much for coming down here and doing the show. And it's very meaningful for me that you have been the first guest here.
It's even more meaningful for me, Troy. We have lots to talk about. There is lots to share about our trips to Cork, our 9/11 experience, the strategic thinking that you've shared with me, the people leader, the great people leader that you are, and much, much more. Thanks.
Well, thank you.
God bless.
Thank you. God bless you. Thanks again for joining me today on the Ameritocracy Show. Be sure to follow me on social media and our website at troyedgar.com, where you can get more information and sign up for my weekly email. I hope you have a great week.